Alright, good evening, peace and blessings. This is Brother Mike X Speaks. Tonight, we're going to talk about the institution called slavery. And there are a lot of forces that talk about a post-racial society, as if slavery is no longer an issue. But I beg to differ. Most of us have no real understanding of what slavery did to us as a people, talking about African Americans particularly. And because they don't have a real understanding and knowledge of what was taken from us, it stops us from really missing, a lot of us from really knowing, what we don't have as opposed to what other races have. I hear a lot of times people, African Americans themselves, talking about we're the only race on this planet that doesn't have unity, that can't come together and be supportive of one another. And there's a definite reason for that. And we're going to discuss that for a little while tonight. What I want to highlight, a lot of people have never heard of an individual called Willie Lynch. Willie Lynch, according to folklore, was a plantation owner from the West Indies, a white plantation owner from the West Indies, who was brought here to America by American plantation owners who were having problems with their slave population. A lot of them were running away, a lot of them were doing things to try to interrupt the institution of slavery here in America. And since the institution of slavery in the West Indies was older than the institution of slavery in America, a lot of them, of course, had more experience with dealing with the slave population. So I'm going to read you a letter from Willie Lynch, an address, actually, that he gave to the American slave plantation owners who brought him to America to help them learn how to better deal with their slave population. Gentlemen, I greet you here on the banks of the James River in the year of our Lord 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I am here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along its old highways in great numbers, you are here using the tree and the rope on occasion. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple of miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the fields too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I am not here to enumerate your problems. However, I am here to introduce you to methods of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseer can use it. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves, and I take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control purposes. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will work throughout the South. Take this simple list of differences and think about them. On top of my list is age, but it is there only because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. There is intelligence, sex, size of plantation, status on plantation, attitude of owners, whether the slaves live in the valley, on the hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, are tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy is stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. The black slave, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male, and the young black male against the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female. You must also have your white servants and overseers distrust all blacks, but it is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensively for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful. Perpetually means forever. Distrustful. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, what I just read to you, was supposedly an address from a white plantation owner named Willie Lynch to American plantation owners throughout the South. Some people say that this letter, that this isn't real. A lot of other people swear by them. Whether one is true or the other is true, we must agree that the American black community is divided and conquered like no other group of people on this planet. It seems like, you cannot deny that we seem to be divided across those lines. Old versus young, male versus female, the well-to-do or the middle class versus the poverty, level, the grassroots. There's a few things in that letter that I want to highlight, though. The first one is Africans did not accept slavery on a collective level. Many have been led to believe that Africans just laid down and just accepted being stolen from Africa and brought all the way over here to America and forced to work, and they just accepted this. But as you can see in this letter, he talked about how there were crops that were going, where they were being left in the field too long. There were fires, there were runaways. Many of us may not know about people like Nat Turner, people who led slave revolts, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark VC, David Walker. These are some names that you might want to pick up on and do some study on. As you can see, Africans did not just take slavery lying down. There were a lot of people who rebelled and strived to the utmost to try to break free of this inhumane system, called American slavery. The second thing I wanted to highlight is that this speech was given in the year 1712. And as you heard in the speech, he said that if this system was used for at least 1 year, it would last at least 300 years, maybe even perpetually forever. Now, 300 years from the year 1712 is the year 2012, and it seems like it worked, it worked to a fault, because today, in the year 2012, getting ready to go into the year 2013, we're just as divided and conquered along these lines as we've ever been. You still have older people against younger people. You still have younger people against older people. You still have light-skinned people, who feel that they're better than dark-skinned people, and sometimes dark-skinned people who feel that they're either better or worse, than light-skinned people. You still have us in a position where we still don't know how to work with one another so that we can help ourselves instead of waiting for somebody else to help us. The last thing I wanted to highlight is when he said it is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust only us. And this is still going on today. You know, we find it hard a lot of times as black people, as African Americans, to find trust in each other, to learn how to work with each other, to learn how to, you know, to put our interests first, you know, and lead ourselves, you know, and talk amongst ourselves so that we can decide what's best for ourselves. A lot of us, if there's not a white face on it, if there's not a white face in it, at the head of it or involved in some way, a lot of us just won't participate, you know, and this stops us from being able to get ahead politically. A lot of times this stops us a lot of times from being able to go into businesses of our own. A lot of times when a black person opens up a business, nobody wants to patronize that business. A lot of times they'll go to that business and, you know, they'll expect to get discounts and can I get this for free, or come on brother, you know, hook me up. Things that they would never even think about doing if they was in a white store. So I want you to think about this. You know, go on the internet, play this again, you know. Go on the internet for yourselves, look up Willie Lynch, look up the institution of slavery. I got this out of a pamphlet that I bought some years ago. It's called The Willie Lynch Letter and the Making of a Slave. I say to you, many of these habits and behaviors that we see today, where we don't stick up for one another, where we don't strive to work with one another, where we find it so hard to collaborate with one another, a lot of these habits and behaviors are rooted, deep rooted in our history in this country. And if we don't do more to learn about yesterday, we won't be able to understand why it's so hard for us to get together today. And if we can't find a way to get together today, our future is bleak. So, you know, enough said on that subject for now. But, you know, stick with us. And, you know, give me your comments. Give me your critiques. I know a lot of the things that we're dealing with on Brother Mike X Speaks, my YouTube channel, are things that we would like swept under the rug. You know, the mainstream, you know, the white folk today, a lot of them will say, well, yo, I never enslaved anybody. You know, why should I be held accountable for what's going on in the black community? And many of us, you know, because we've been so thoroughly conditioned, we don't want to deal with this type of stuff either. You know, because it calls for people to be responsible. It calls for people to learn their history. It calls for people to adopt new standards of how they'll live their lives and how they will live amongst their neighbors, you know. And a lot of us don't want to do that hard work, you know what I mean? And this is why a lot of us don't want to deal with this stuff. But if we don't deal with this stuff, I promise you again, not only will things get worse, but you know, we'll never be able to stop them, you know, if we don't take that responsibility amongst ourselves. So, you know, thank you for tuning in to this YouTube channel. Peace.